Hello and welcome to Lawline. Lawline is a live call-in talk show radio brought to you by the attorneys of Levin Papantonio. I'm Daniel Nigh and I'm here with Megan McBride. And today we're going to talk to you about Tylenol. Now, many of you all know about Tylenol and how Tylenol is used for pain relief, fevers, and even new reports showing that it can treat anxiety. However, before you rush to the medicine cabinet, we've got some things to tell you about the catastrophic side effects that Tylenol can cause. Now, many of you all may be thinking, we've known for a while that you don't take Tylenol with alcohol and that you don't take a whole bottle of Tylenol and overdose on it, but that's not what we're here to talk about. And Megan, could you please tell the audience specifically what we're talking about and the side effects of Tylenol?
Sure. In 2009, the FDA had an advisory committee meeting where they looked at the research and studies concerning Tylenol and acetaminophen and how it affects the liver. The FDA advisory committee found that Tylenol, even at the recommended dose at the time, was too high for the liver and people were suffering acute liver injuries. So, as you discussed, Daniel, people that are taking over-the-counter Tylenol, even though they're healthy, one day can experience severe liver damage, liver failure, requiring hospitalization. Unfortunately, some people have passed away as a result of taking Tylenol.
So these could even be people that are our age?
Definitely, yes.
Okay. And they may even be following the instructions that are on the label and still have this liver damage?
Right. The FDA changed the label in 2011 and they changed the dosage for each tab to be 325 milligrams as opposed to what they were before for each Tylenol tablet. So back in 2009, 2010, 2011, even today, some people are taking Tylenol that is higher than the recommended Tylenol dose because the labels are still being changed as we speak.
Okay. We've got a few callers on hold, so let's go ahead and take one of these calls right now. Hello, welcome to Lawline. Do you have a question?
I do.
Go ahead.
Okay. I recently I took a CVS acetaminophen and later suffered a liver injury. Is this the kind of case you guys are looking at as well?
Okay, let me make sure I got the question right. You took the CVS brand of acetaminophen, and then later on you had liver damage?
Right.
Okay. Megan, is that one of the cases we'd be looking at?
Yeah, sure. Can I ask your name first? Who am I talking to?
My name is Ryan.
Hi, Ryan. Unfortunately, if you just took acetaminophen from a CVS brand as opposed to the Tylenol brand, then as of right now, we are not pursuing those cases. These are called generic drug, the generic drug like CVS or Walgreens brand or any other brand like those are generic, and the Supreme Court has found that generic manufacturers of these drugs are not liable compared to brand manufacturers. So the brand manufacturer for the Tylenol products is McNeil Consumer Products and Johnson & Johnson. So unless you were taking a McNeil or Johnson & Johnson Tylenol branded product, you do not have a case at this time, or at least not one that we're investigating at this time.
Okay. All right.
All right. Thank you for calling.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Let's go to line with another caller. Hello and welcome to Lawline. Do you have a question for us?
Hi, yes. My husband was just diagnosed with liver cancer, and I know that he was taking Tylenol for his migraines. Is that a case that y'all are pursuing?
Well, I'm sorry to hear about that.
Yeah.
Megan, is that a case that we're looking at right now?
Right now, we're investigating acute liver damage cases. So someone who suffered from or was diagnosed with liver cancer and has been treated for liver cancer for a number of years are not the cases that we're investigating right now. Unfortunately, those cases are different than the acute liver damage. We're pursuing cases where an individual was otherwise healthy or had no liver damage or liver failure, took Tylenol, and then went into the hospital and was diagnosed with some sort of liver failure.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry to hear about your husband.
Oh, thank you. And I appreciate you answering my question.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Megan, are there any other types of pre-existing liver damage issues that we wouldn't be handling those kind of cases?
Yeah, definitely. So again, like I said, we are pursuing acute liver damage cases. So somebody who had something like psoriasis, or in this case, unfortunately, liver cancer, or anything where somebody had liver damage for a number of years, we are not pursuing those cases. Someone who may have had some sort of liver failure as a result of drinking for a number of years, those are not cases that involve acute liver damage.
Okay. Could you tell the audience what acute liver failure means?
Sure. In this situation, and it's different for each individual. So as discussed with you, these cases are very individualized. So when somebody goes into the doctor after taking Tylenol and they were completely healthy for a number of years with no liver problem, if they then have an issue, feeling sick, whatnot, and the doctor takes a blood test and they find that their liver numbers are off the charts, then that will be acute liver failure. Again, there's a number of tests that the doctors will run. The medical records will indicate that it is an acute liver failure. As discussed, these do not involve cases where somebody had some sort of liver failure or liver disease as a result of something else going on in their body for a number of years.
Right. I've heard the statistic is 60,000 emergency room visits, 4,000 hospitalizations, and nearly 400 deaths every year caused by acetaminophen liver acute failure. Right.
Acetaminophen is is the highest drug that is causing liver failure compared to any other drug. It's as the FDA discussed in the advisory committee meeting and in their warning to consumers and to doctors, this is a drug to look for people who have liver issues. And as discussed, there are people who don't have liver issues and they are all of a sudden diagnosed with liver failure.
Okay, I see we have a couple other callers on the line, on the phone, so let's go ahead and take another caller here. Good evening, welcome to Lawline. Do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question.
Can you help us? What's your question, please?
I was wondering, how long do these cases take to settle, and are there settlements of these Tylenol cases?
Okay, so if your question is how long does it take for these settlements, and have we already seen any settlements of any of these Tylenol cases at this time, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Megan, do you have any answers for that question?
Right now, there are no settlements in the acute liver failure cases. These cases are really new. The Judicial Panel for Multi-District Litigation just recently consolidated these cases to an MDL in Pennsylvania. And so right now, the parties are in the very beginning of investigating what McNeil and what Johnson & Johnson knew about this drug, how early they knew that it caused acute liver failure, how early they knew that it caused liver failure at what dose. There's a lot of information that we have to figure out before we can then prove that Tylenol caused an individual's liver failure. So as you can imagine, that involves hundreds of thousands of pages of documents that we will have to review and look at. Then we will have to go through a discovery phase of deposing the employees of Johnson & Johnson and McNeil, and then ultimately for each individual, we will go through their discovery process. So while there's no settlements right now, we do believe that there is a case against McNeil and Johnson & Johnson. We just have to go through the process of proving the case against them.
Okay. Just a quick question. You talked about multi-district litigation. Mm-hmm. Is that the same thing as a class action lawsuit?
No, a multi-district litigation, or sometimes I refer to it as an MDL, is a case where all of the cases are consolidated into one action before one judge in federal court. And that judge determines pre-trial litigation issues, such as depositions. How many depositions can we take? If there's an issue with documents, he or she helps decide those issues. The difference with the class action is every person has his or her individual claim. So in addition to working up those thousands of claims for discovery in front of that one judge, we also work up the individual cases for each individual plaintiff. That involves ordering the medical records for each plaintiff. It requires us contacting our clients, sometimes having depositions for our clients, defending those. Sometimes it involves us going to a client and interviewing them before, a videographer. There's a lot of steps that we take for an individual in an MDL that you don't have for a class action case.
Right. So I think what you're saying here is we've got the same defendant in these cases, or the same two defendants in these cases. And so we handle all the common issues, which taking the depositions of all the same internal executives and getting all the same documents from all of them. But the injuries are different for each and every one of them. And that's what's different between a class action and how we handle this. We actually focus on the injury, which is getting their medical records and seeing how the medicine injured them. Is that right?
Right. That was a more concise way to put it, yes.
Thank you. All right. We think we have another caller on the line, so let's go ahead and take that question. Good evening and welcome to Lawline. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I can't afford to pay a lawyer right now, but I might have a case. What do I do about that?
All right, so if your question is you can't afford to pay a lawyer, but you think you might have a case, is that something that we can help you out with, Megan?
Definitely. The way we handle contracts, or at least one option, is a contingency fee contract. A contingency fee contract is a type of contract that you sign with a lawyer where if the case doesn't end in your favor, you don't have to pay. Now, if the case does end in your favor, let's say you do receive a settlement or there is a trial and you receive money, then you will pay a fee to the lawyer. In addition to fees, you also pay for expenses. And in these cases, in a multi-district litigation case, expenses are kept relatively low per case because, as you can imagine, cases against large pharmaceutical companies can be fairly expensive. They involve, experts. Very qualified experts who, are in the fields of epidemiology, or, in this case, we'll have experts who, are familiar with the liver and the process of liver failure, and ER doctors and whatnot. One case cannot pay for those types of injuries. So the benefit of a multi-district litigation is multiple cases help pay for them in a common benefit fund. So in these situations, we do keep the expenses low. There are case-by-case expenses, which involve, ordering medical records, filing the case. But not one case burdens, 10, 20 experts that are required for these big cases to prove liability against the manufacturer.
Okay. Do you have any other questions?
No, that's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. And it looks like that's all the callers we have at this time. I think one of the main questions that a lot of you may be asking or wondering is, especially if you've suffered from one of these injuries of liver damage, is I know that I took, maybe you've got this question, I know that I took Tylenol, and I recall having liver damage not that much later, going to the hospital and suffering from acute liver failure. How can I prove my case? I didn't save the bottle. I don't have a receipt showing that I took Tylenol. How do I prove my case?
Well, in this situation, we are investigating cases where the injured person took Tylenol within 1 week of hospitalization. If it was a recent injury, within the last year, hopefully you kept your pill bottle. If you have any pill bottles or remaining pills, you should keep it. And then ultimately, if we're investigating your claim, send it to the attorney. If it's a situation where, it's been a number of months, the pill bottle was thrown away before you even knew that there was a potential lawsuit, then what we will do is ask you to sign an affidavit or go before, maybe in a deposition, testify that you took Tylenol at the time of or around the time of your hospitalization.
Okay, thank you.
In addition to that, the hospital records will also have some indication that there may be acetaminophen, use around the time of the injury.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Many of you may be asking, okay, I call up the firm and now I want to know what happens to my case after I call up the firm. Where do you all go from this? I pick up the phone, I call your number. Where does it go from there?
So after you call our law firm, sign a contract, and return forms such as a medical authorization release form, our firm will send medical authorization releases to the hospital, to your prescribing physician if there is one, to the pharmacy, and collect medical records. That's how we evaluate the injury and how we determine the product use around the time of the injury. It also helps us determine whether acute liver failure was diagnosed and when that occurred. So after we collect the medical records, we will determine whether we should file a claim. We do that as quick as possible, but sometimes it takes time to collect medical records. Typically, nationwide pharmacies will take longer to send us the records compared to maybe a mom and pop pharmacy. So then we file the claim, if there is one, and then it is consolidated and transferred into that multi-district litigation. At that point, the case typically has some sort of form set of questions that we will have to provide the defendants. In situations, in most multi-district litigations, that form is called a plaintiff's fact sheet. In this case, the plaintiff's fact sheet is about 28 pages long of questions that will ask you, your medical history, your family medical history, questions like that you should be able to answer fairly easy.
Okay, thank you. Many of you may be thinking in these cases, and we get these calls all the time where people will call up and they'll say, you know what, should I take Tylenol for my injuries? Should I take what the doctors prescribe me? Or should I be taking Advil? Or should I be taking one of these other issues? And the thing I'll tell you right now is we're not medical doctors, so we're not going to be giving you advice as to which medicines you should be taking. Is that right, Megan?
That's right. I will not give medical advice to a client. In fact, if somebody is experiencing symptoms of something at that time, sometimes people say, I feel like I'm getting sick off of a drug, what should I do? And I say right away, call your doctor.
Okay. So could you please explain to everybody, where are we right now with these cases in terms, I know you mentioned we're multi-district litigation, Eastern District of Pennsylvania?
That's right.
And where are we with these cases right now? Where is it at?
Right now, we are at the very early stage of discovery. So at this point, the plaintiffs are organizing themselves. The defendants are trying to figure out what documents they have that relate to this litigation. We are getting ready to send deposition notices to the defendants to determine, what they knew, when, where, how. So at this point, we have to request documents from the defendants because it's such a large, well-marketed drug. I anticipate, and it's been on the market for 50 years. I anticipate hundreds of thousands of documents that the plaintiffs will have to go through and sort out to find the information that we want to potentially use as evidence for the case.
Now, many of you may be wondering, how many cases do we think there are out there? How many people that have suffered them? I know we talked about 20,000 visits, potentially 400 hospitalizations or 400 deaths. Do you have any estimate as to the number of cases that might be out there?
It's hard to say. Right now, there are about 100 cases filed in the MDL. There are other jurisdictions that have cases as well. So there are, state court jurisdictions that have claims. It's hard to say how many claims are filed in each state court. I would say maybe 20 here, 20 there. As far as how many people have been injured, how many people have potential lawsuits, there's a lot of factors, and it goes, it's case-by-case determination that we have to look at. We have to look at when someone was injured, what they knew and how they knew it before we can file. So, there could be, like you said, thousands of people that have been injured, but we have to determine, were they injured by the brand product? How long has it been since they were injured? So I think potentially there may be thousands of cases, but there's a lot to prove before we can file each claim. So you may not see hundreds more filed right away because it does take some time to investigate. So to answer the question, sure, it's hard to say.
Megan, what kind of tests are there to show someone that they know that they have acute liver failure?
So there are a number of tests that, if somebody thinks that they're sick and they want to be tested by the doctor, they'll go into the hospital, and the hospital will likely take their blood to determine, what the toxicity level is. There are a number of liver function tests that they can take. There are imaging tests that they can take in the hospital. They can also, in extreme cases, take a biopsy of the liver and examine the tissue of the liver. I think that those cases are rare, thankfully, but in a lot of situations, a simple test like an INR test. A lot of people are familiar with INR to determine the clotting factors in their blood, and so one of those tests helps determine whether the liver is toxic at this point, and then they'll ask you questions, for instance, have you taken acetaminophen, and kind of go through the outline of risk factors that can that deal with liver toxicity and what else could have caused the liver damage.
Thank you. Now, when we're looking at trying to evaluate these cases, there's all sorts of things that we're looking at to tell us what these cases are worth. Some people are going through hospitalization, some people experience, unfortunately, death, all sorts of things. But can you explain to the audience what we're looking for when we're evaluating these cases?
Sure. In terms of how much a case is worth, it's too soon to tell, really. But we often, in these cases, know that this person has been to the hospital, so they've experienced, maybe thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of medical expenses. In addition to the hospitalization, individuals often go to the doctor after. And especially in liver failure cases, after somebody has experienced something like liver failure, that involves years of treatment likely. It's not something that you get over very quickly. So it involves follow-up tests, follow-up procedures perhaps to determine how healthy can we get this person. That takes a lot of money. So that goes into evaluating how much a case is worth. We also look at situations where if you're going to the doctor all the time, or if you're in the hospital, likely that individual has missed a lot of work. Some people have experienced layoffs, so they can't work at all. Either they've been fired or they're so sick that they can't work. So lost wages is a consideration that we look at for a lot of these cases. Other than that, just really any expense that you have in terms of treatment. What are the other, there are a lot of treatment options, but sometimes people have to take other medication. And so the cost of paying for other medication as a result of your liver failure will be taken into consideration.
And so many of the audience may be thinking, do I have to preserve all my medical bills and all my medical records before I call you all in?
The best option, if you have your medical records, if you have any, Tylenol bottles, anything, it's best to preserve that information, preserve those records, and then send it to us. The more information I have as early as possible is better for the case. In addition, we will likely have to produce that information to the defendants during the plaintiff's fact sheet stage of the litigation. So if you have anything, it's best to give that information to the law firm.
That's right. And just so many of you all may be thinking that you have to collect all this information before you can ever call us in. I think the most important thing is that you call us up. At any point, of course, you should preserve the product and preserve any bill that you have, certainly, but don't wait to call us up. There are some statute of limitations issues and some real pitfalls that can really create a problem for your case if you wait too long to call us. Also, we handle cases nationwide, not just in the area of Pensacola or in Mississippi, Alabama, but nationwide. We represent clients across the nation. Anything that you would like to tell them about when these clients should call in?
It's best to call in immediately. You know, if you think that you have suffered an injury as a result of taking Tylenol, and it relates to the, you know, criteria that we've kind of outlined here, acute liver failure, you know, hospitalization after somebody has taken Tylenol within a week of that hospitalization, then it's really important to call an attorney right away. You kind of touched on this a little bit, but each case has a time period where you have to file a lawsuit. That time period is called a statute of limitations. And it really determines, the statute of limitations may bar your recovery if you miss that deadline. So that's something that we look at right away when a potential client calls our office. We ask right away, when were you injured? How long have you known that this injury could have related to your product use? Because if you had known it and you missed that state statute of limitations, then you may not be able to file a lawsuit. Or even if you do file it based on what's called a discovery rule, which is a time period where you knew or should have known about the lawsuit, it's a big hurdle that we have to cross in your litigation. It's a hurdle that we would prefer not to have to address, even though it's, you know, the discovery rule is a legitimate procedural you know, step that we can take and argue before the court. It's best just to call right away and allow us to file the suit right away.
Well, thank you, Megan. That's all the time we have tonight. And again, this is Lawline. And again, if you have issue with the Tylenol, please call us immediately. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
You're watching WFBD Blab Television, bringing you local programming covering the Gulf Coast region, now available in high definition. We'd like to thank you for watching and encourage you to stay tuned for more local TV with local personality, here only on Blab TV.